Jog Vid with Miss Whittaker. Write down today's date, Tuesday, 31st of March 2020, underline it with a ruler, then start the Do Now quiz. Pause me while you do the Do Now quiz. Okay, let's correct the Do Now quiz in green pen. Scroll down to the next page, there's the answers. A, it's a group of indigenous people. I say indigenous, you say indigenous. I say indigenous, you say indigenous. In Kenya, I say Kenya, you say Kenya, and Tanzania. I say Tanzania, you say Tanzania. One more time, I say Tanzania, you say Tanzania. Green pen, you Do Now quiz answers. Pause me while you do that. Okay, so we're going to do a bit of a recap. We'll do that for a reading, then we'll answer some questions on the reading. This just goes over what we did last lesson. I'll read the reading to you. You track it as I read. So, last lesson we started looking at tourism in the Masai Mara National Park in Kenya. We now know that although most people in Kenya are employed in agriculture, farming, the number of jobs in tourism is increasing. The Kenyan government wants more people to work in tourism because people who work in tourism have higher incomes than people who work in agriculture. So, they pay more tax to the government. But the creation of the Masai Mara National Park in 1961 forced the Masai, a group of indigenous people, off their land. This was a challenge for the Masai because they are nomadic pastoralists, which means they move around to find water and fresh grass for their cattle. Now, the Masai only live on small bits of land, which makes it harder for them to feed their cattle. Many Masai are now looking for paid jobs because they can no longer survive on their cattle. Just a few words that are a bit tricky to pronounce in there. One of those is Masai. I say Masai, you say Masai. Another one is agriculture. I say agriculture, you say agriculture. And finally, nomadic pastoralists. I say nomadic pastoralists, you say nomadic pastoralists. Now, a nomadic pastor is just someone, a farmer, who moves around, and they move around to find better water and better grass for their cows. Cows are also known as cattle. If you're farming cows, a more sophisticated way of saying that is that you are raising cattle. So, to summarise what we did, we looked at the creation of the Masai Mara National Park. And the National Park was created to protect plants and animals. Now, the Kenyan government wants more people to visit that park so that they can create more jobs. And we know that people who've got jobs have higher incomes, so they pay more tax to the government. So if the government can create more jobs in the Masai Mara, they'll get more tax, and they can use that tax for education and healthcare. But the problem was that the Masai were moved off the land in the national park. And that's a big problem for them because they're nomadic pastoralists. And a nomadic pastoralist is someone who moves around a large area of land to find water and grass for their cattle. So the Masai got kicked out the Masai Mara by the Kenyan government. And as a result, it's become much harder for them to live off their cattle. So many of them now are having to get jobs. What you're going to do is you're going to answer the questions that are based on the reading. Then, you're going to green pen those answers using the answers on the next page of the document. Answer question 4, A, B, C, and D, based on the reading now. Off you go. Okay, let's go through the answers together. Green pen your answers. Make sure you're using sophisticated vocabulary. So if you put farming for question A, change it to agriculture. Agriculture is a much more sophisticated way of saying farming. If you put cows for question C, green pen it, change it to cattle. Again, that's just more sophisticated. Right. Next, we're going to think about tourism in the Masai Mara. By the end of the lesson, I want us to be able to have a go answering the question, how sustainable is tourism in the Masai Mara? To do this, we need to look at different people's opinions of tourism in the Masai Mara. I've taken these quotes from a geography researcher's study on tourism in the Masai Mara. So, these are real people's opinions. What we're going to do is we're going to read these quotes, we're going to do a flow diagram, and then you're going to write up that flow diagram as a paragraph. First, we're going to do stage 6, so read the Kenyan government's opinion on tourism in the Masai Mara. Then, complete the flow diagram to explain why the Kenyan government wants to increase the number of tourists in the Masai Mara. In the Kenyan government's opinion, there is a keyword benefit. If you benefit from something, you do well from it. So you're all benefiting from doing this worksheet because it's going to make you very successful geographers. You're doing well from doing this worksheet. Okay, let's see what the Kenyan government has said. We aim to double the number of tourists who visit the Masai Mara each year. Our Moments of Wonder adverts show the benefits tourism brings to the area. These include new jobs for the Masai people. Okay, if you want to read more into this, the Moments of Wonder adverts are available on the internet. If you type in Reuters, R-E-U-T-E-R-S, Moments of Wonder, there are, I think there's 4 or 5 videos there, really well shot videos that show the Masai Mara beautifully, and they're designed to attract tourists to the area. Okay, thinking about this flow diagram here then. So the Kenyan government wants to increase the number of tourists so that there are more jobs for the Masai. Eventually, that's going to lead to higher tax for the government, but what's missing? How does more jobs for the Masai lead to higher tax for the government? Write down A in your exercise books and fill in the missing part of the flow diagram. Pause me while you do that. Right, scroll down. Let's see if you got it right. The Kenyan government wants to increase the number of tourists so that there are more jobs for the Masai. Therefore, there will be higher incomes for the Masai, so there is a higher tax. They'll pay higher tax to the government. What you're going to do now is you're going to write up this flow diagram into a paragraph. Stage 8. Using the flow diagram above in full sentences, explain why the Kenyan government wants to increase the number of tourists in the Masai Mara. A good answer will explain using connectives, so therefore and consequently, and include all points on the flow diagram. If you're stuck on how to start, you can start, the Kenyan government wants to increase the number of tourists in the Masai Mara because. Let me just repeat that. You can start, the Kenyan government wants to increase the number of tourists in the Masai Mara because. Pause me while you give that one a go. Okay, let's see how you did. Using a green pen, read through the model answer on the next page that I'll talk you through. Add in any parts that you've missed into your answer. I've underlined the sophisticated vocabulary I've used. Use these words to upgrade your answer. Let's go through my model together. Right. I'll read through it and then I'll talk to you about why it's a successful answer. The Kenyan government wants to double the number of tourists visiting the Masai Mara each year because it will create employment opportunities for the Masai who currently live off their cattle. Therefore, if the Masai are employed in tourism, their incomes will increase. Consequently, the government will get higher taxes, which they can use to improve the quality of life for people in Kenya by spending their tax revenues on education and healthcare. So I've started off and I've rephrased the question. The question was, why the Kenyan government wants to increase the number of tourists in the Masai Mara. Let us go and look at my first sentence now. I've just reworded that question, look. The Kenyan government wants to double the number of tourists visiting the Masai Mara each year because. And then I've gone on to explain why they want to double the number of tourists using the points that we went through together on the flow diagram. To connect each of those points, I've used a connective. I've used because first, then I've used therefore, then I've used consequently. I've also used sophisticated vocabulary. So where I've underlined it, the text, that's where I've used sophisticated vocabulary. So rather than saying it will create jobs, I've said it will create employment opportunities. I've used the word income instead of money. I've mentioned that it's going to improve the quality of life of people in Kenya. And I've specified how it's going to improve the quality of life with education and by improving healthcare. So you got several tasks. Make sure you're using connectives. If you're not, you need to add in some connectives. Make sure you're using sophisticated vocabulary. If you're not, choose some of the words that I've underlined, put them in green pen in your answer. And finally, check that you've got all the steps on the flow diagram. Pause me while you do this. Alright, we're going to do the same again now for a different opinion. We're going to look at the opinion of a Masai tribesperson. We're on stage 10, track stage 10. Read the opinion of a Masai tribesperson on tourism in the Masai Mara. Then, complete the flow diagram to explain why, according to the Masai tribesperson, the Masai do not from tourism. So now we're thinking about why the Masai haven't done well from tourism, why they're not benefiting. I'll read through the speech bubble to you, you just track the speech bubble. We can't say we are typical Masais anymore. The tourists have changed our culture and the government has taken our best pasture lands. We are no longer nomadic pastoralists because we just don't have the land to graze our cattle anymore. Let's summarise that. What's this Masai tribesperson saying? So he's saying they're not typical Masai. A typical Masai would be a Masai that's like other Masai. If you're typical, you're similar to other people. So they're not typical anymore because tourists have changed them. Tourists have changed the Masai's culture. Culture just means their way of life. And the government, as we know, they were forced off their lands by the government. So the government has taken their best pasture, the lands that they used to use for feeding their cattle. So they're no longer nomadic pastoralists. They don't move around feeding their cattle anymore because they don't have the land to do that anymore. Let's see if we can put that into a flow diagram. The Kenyan government took the best pasture. Tracking the flow diagram now. The Kenyan government took the best pasture, they took the best lands and they forced the Masai off them. And that's meant that now some Masai are no longer nomadic pastoralists. I say nomadic pastoralists, you say nomadic pastoralists. So what's missing? Why is it that the Kenyan government taking the land has meant that some Masai are no longer pastoralists? Write down B, write down what's missing, pause me while you do that. Alright, let's see if you got it right. So the Kenyan government took the best pasture. This means that it's difficult for some Masai to feed their cattle. Therefore, some Masai are no longer nomadic pastoralists, they're no longer moving around to feed their cattle. We're going to do exactly the same as we did for the previous one. We're going to write that flow diagram up into a paragraph. That's stage 12, look. Track stage 12. Using the flow diagram above, in full sentences, explain why some Masai do not benefit from tourism in the Masai Mara. A good answer will explain using connectives and include all the points on the flow diagram. Again, if you're struggling on how to start off, take a look at the question and think about how you can reword the question to give you your first sentence. Give it a go, pause me while you do that, and then we'll go through it together. Off you go. Right, let's have a look at my model answer. Some Masai do not benefit from tourism because when the Masai Mara National Park was created in 1961, the Kenyan government forced the Masai off their best pasture. Therefore, it has become difficult for some Masai to feed their cattle because they only have a small area of land. So, some Masai are no longer nomadic pastoralists and have been forced to find paid employment in order to meet their basic needs, food and shelter. Let's talk through why this model answer is successful then. So it starts off by rewording the question. Let's look at the question. Explain why some Masai do not benefit from tourism in the Masai Mara. So I've started off, some Masai do not benefit from tourism because, and there's my first connective. I've also used therefore and because here again and so to explain my point. So I've used connectives to explain my points. The words that I've underlined are where I've used sophisticated vocabulary. So pasture, that just means land that you can feed cattle off. And I've used cattle rather than cows. And I've said that the Masai are no longer nomadic pastoralists. They no longer move their cows around to find food and water. I've also said that they've been forced to find paid employment in order to meet their basic needs. Basic needs are all the things that you need in order to survive. So they're your food, shelter. Thinking of things that wouldn't be a basic need. A TV wouldn't be a basic need. Although we might think it in these times, Netflix would not be a basic need. But things, really basic things like food and shelter and clothes, shoes, healthcare, they are basic needs. Tasks for you, green penning them. Add in any parts you've missed into your answer. So if you're missing bits on the flow diagram, I'll add those in. I have underlined the sophisticated vocabulary I've used. Use these words to upgrade your answer. Pause me while you do that. Okay, that's all for today. Well done for completing your second geography lesson. If you want to read more about tourism in Kenya, there are some really good videos out there. So I've just put the link in here for the Moments of Wonder campaign. These, remember, were the adverts that the Kenyan government had put out to attract tourists. They are really staggering. They're really well filmed as well. They're really short. They're like 3 minutes long each. So give those a look at if you can. Hans Rosling, my favourite geographer, has got a video on YouTube about world poverty in general and reasons why we should be hopeful about world poverty. That's worth a watch as well. If you're interested in the Masai, there's a great article on The Guardian that I've linked below at the bottom there. That's about the Masai in Tanzania. So Tanzania is a country that borders Kenya. And the Masai live in both Kenya and Tanzania. And they face similar problems in both countries. So have a go at that article if that's something that interests you. If this work has taken you less than an hour, do a requiz of quiz 2 and 3. It's really important that you're doing an hour of geography where it's been timetabled. So anytime the work takes you less than an hour, use that as an opportunity to go over previous things that we've done together in your quiz books. This week, do quiz 2 and 3. Make sure that you're green penning it and correcting any bits you've not got quite right. That's all from me. Thank you.